All right, everyone. Welcome to session 8. It is Tuesday, May 10th, about 6:15 Central Time. This is the last of the slides for the course. So kind of the agenda for this evening is we'll go through the slides. These will deal directly with what's going on with Code Platoon. And then I'll kind of expound a little bit on some of the technologies that you'll learn and how they tie together. And then we'll get into solving some challenges for the rest of the evening. I will be solving the challenges in VS Code tonight, just so you can kind of see what it's like to work with a IDE directly instead of just the replit. For those of you that go on to any type of boot camp, I imagine some boot camps may recommend different IDEs, but one of the big industry standards is VS Code. And the reason for that is because of the flexibility of languages. If you're writing JavaScript, Python, Ruby, all of that can be done in the same IDE. And I'll kind of give a quick look at that as well. Right. So, and again, we've talked about a lot of this stuff. Ankur may have hit some of it, but this is just kind of a reminder for everything. So Code Platoon is a 14-week immersing full web development stack program in which you'll be learning Python, Django, which is a Python framework that runs the backend server, JavaScript, and React, which is a JavaScript framework that runs the front end server, HTML, and CSS. HTML, kind of the analogy that gets thrown around. Some of you may have experience writing static web pages. So HTML is kind of the lumber. It's the 2x4s, it's the wall studs, it's the braces. It's what holds everything together and puts it in its place. The CSS, which is cascading style sheets, is what gives everything its color, its specific look. If you have rounded edges, if your text is a different color, if there's any type of like something changes when you hover over it, that's all typically accomplished through CSS. After completing the program, the veteran or military spouse will be hireable as a junior full stack web developer and eligible for an internship through one of our generous host companies. So again, the amount of internships vary from course to course, so I can't tell you how many there would be for any future cohorts, but typically the process for that is when usually about a third of the way into the course, Rod who's the founder of Code Platoon and does all of the he wrangles all of the internships and apprenticeships for students. It's a full-time job for him. He's going to come out and say, look, we think we've got X amount of internships. Who's interested? And there's typically more people interested in than there are internships. And he'll say, okay. And if you're agreeing to the internship, because Rod is basically providing a list of names back to those companies, you're agreeing to participate in the internship. So typically, you wouldn't go out applying for other jobs immediately. You'd wait to see if you got something in the internship. So if you get an internship from a company, Code Platoon asks that you take it. Like there's no legal enforcement of or anything like that, but it's just basically good manners at that point. The internships are paid. I don't know what the floor is on it now 3 years later, but like when I was going through, it was a minimum 3-month internship at a minimum of $20 an hour, which is, I mean, it works out to, I think, around like $42,000 a year or whatever, which for basically like a three-month internship is great in the world of unpaid internships or extremely low paid internships. That would not be a reasonable salary for a starting junior developer. So what you would expect is that you would, all of the internships all of these companies are offering the internship with the intention of wanting to be able to hire you out of the internship as a full-time junior developer when you're done. At that point, the salary negotiation is between you and the company. Code Platoon doesn't enforce anything there. But like for me personally, I work for a company called Eighth Light. They do a 6-month apprenticeship, and for all the apprentices, even those that are not hired directly through Code Platoon, they basically give us 60% of a starting junior developer's pay. At the time, it was, I think, like 72,000. So 60% of that worked out to just about 40,000. I think I was making like 27 an hour is what it worked out to hourly. But what that boiled down to is I was getting paid that money 8 hours a day, full time, 40 hours a week for 6 months. And all I did was continue to learn. And different internships will be different. The vast majority of them are like 3 or 4 months. Some will even be where maybe they offer it at 3 months, and like you at 3 months you're not quite ready to be a full-time junior developer, so maybe they offer you an additional month of ramp up time at the internship pay. But the companies themselves are typically working to be able to hire you out of that position. And so like for me, at the end of my apprenticeship, I passed the apprenticeship review period, and my pay immediately jumped up to 70,000 or 72,000, whatever it was at the time. So basically for having no experience except for like a 3-month boot camp, and then they paid me to learn for an additional 6 months to jump up to 70 some odd $1,000 a year. And three years into it now, basically, like I'm well into the 6 figures. It's been a pretty amazing transition for me. Transition doesn't go as smooth for everyone, but the opportunities are out there, right? So it's not where, I mean, basically you would expect to continue to make $45,000 a year. Like, I mean, also dependent upon your location. I mean, so if you're working as a web developer in a small town, that may be something more reasonable. But if you're in or around like a major metropolitan area, and also with the increase in the prevalence of remote work, there has been significant upward salary pressure, which is good for software developers. I mean, the pay is definitely out there in this field of work. So let's see here. So upcoming cohorts, application deadline. So the next 2 full-time cohorts are Sierra Platoon, which is starting on October 3rd, and it lasts till January 20th of 2023. The deadline for that is June 26, 2022. Romeo starts on May 23rd. That one's already locked up. We're past the deadline. Tango Platoon starts on February 6th, 2023, going to May 19th, and that is an end of October cutoff. The part-time nights and weekends is so Delta Platoon, October 3rd through April 14th, July 10th cutoff, and then Echo Platoon is May 30th to December 9th of 2023, so a year from now. And you have until the middle of February to apply for that. I think Greg mentioned it. I don't know if Ankur mentioned it, but if you do the full time, I mean, it is a pretty hefty commitment. Like there isn't you're not going to be able to work, like keep your job and also go to Code Platoon unless you don't sleep. But realistically, like the full-time Code Platoon, especially probably like the first 5 or 6 weeks of it, and you're looking at 8 hours of class time minimum each day, and enough homework over the weekends where the instructors usually yell at people on Sunday afternoon to knock it off and take a break. They'll usually just tell you to stop wherever you're at and take a break and then come in on Monday, because if not, there's generally enough work involved where you're either sleeping at Code Platoon or transiting back and forth. And that's for the in-person. Obviously, no transiting back and forth in the remote session, but you still get the same amount of class time instruction. You get the same amount of homework. I personally tried to shift more towards the morning. So, I mean, I usually got up around 6:45 each morning, got ready, and because I live in Chicago, the bus that goes past my house drops me off at the back door of the Code Platoon building, get into Code Platoon by 7:45. Class would start at 9. They do a stand 2 at around 4:35 each day. And then the evening TA show up until 7 p.m. Monday through Thursday. So you can look at reasonably like 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and then kind of like a 9 to 4:30 or 5 on Fridays, with take home assessments. Like they tend to drop those on the weekend, where they give you the weekend to complete them. And the weekends that you don't have assessments, they tend to give you like larger group activities to complete. All right, so any questions on any of this stuff that I just discussed?
The evening and weekends, is it 3 nights a week and then Saturdays or also Sundays?
Honestly, I'm not sure on that. I can check and get you an answer for that. I know it's like 3 nights a week and at least Saturday. I don't know if there's anything on Sundays or not.
I think I've only ever read Saturday. It's like 8 to 5 Saturday, I think.
Yeah, that sounds about right, because I think like they're shooting for about like, I think full-time is like 32 hours of classroom instruction. So like part-time is like 16 hours a week because it's twice as long. All right. So, but I'll follow up with the part-time instructors and get an exact answer for you on that.
Charles, one question.
Yes, sir.
Which one will you recommend, the full-time or the remote one? Because I'm kind of like debating. I don't live in Chicago area, but I'm planning on moving there just for the 3 months, and I don't know if it is a right idea.
So it comes down to you as far as like what your current employment situation is, and like if you can step away from your career and that you want to make the shift. I'm
about to use my PTO. I have like enough 3 months of PTO.
Nice. That's impressive. So yeah, I mean, you could do that then. The only thing, so yeah, and like it's up to you if that's how you want to do it. Some of the internships are scattered. Like I said, when I went through, we had an internship offered out of Boston for Wayfair. We had an internship out of Dallas, Texas for a financial firm. And then there was one more, I think that was remote. And then the other 5 were all like located in Chicago, and this was pre-pandemic. So it was like you were expected to be in the office in Chicago. I enjoyed the full-time experience and kind of the stress of it and the camaraderie. The things have changed though. Code Platoon has gotten larger. There is the pandemic. I'm not fully versed with like what their in-person requirements are anymore. I know like they've kind of cut it down a little bit, where like when I went through, you could only miss like 5 days if you were using the GI Bill. Versus now, like they've kind of hybridized it where the GI Bill is you can still be full-time and not be there every single day. And that's currently, I can't tell you what the GI regulations will be for say Sierra Platoon or Tango Platoon. They may be the same, they may change. And also I've got an ADD, so doing remote learning is not my strong suit. So I would not have got as much out of Code Platoon remotely as I did by going in person and being in the classroom. But again, that's like a personal preference.
It's too easy. Thank you for your input.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, definitely that is something. Feel free to swing back around with Greg, drop me. You can always ping any of the instructors. I would start with Greg, but he may You can tell him more about your situation. He may be able to give you more customized recommendation for you.
How do companies link up with Code Platoon to essentially offer the internships? I looked into it a little bit, but I guess you might be able to provide more information. Like, is there a contact at Code Platoon companies could reach out to? Or so I work for Signet. I know we have a veteran resource group. I know there's an executive sponsor. I know there's an executive HR sponsor. I'm just wondering how I could try to connect the two.
I'm trying to think who does that now. It may be Jim Hennessy. I would have to ask, but I can definitely get you a name. It's either, because it used to be Rod Levy, who is the founder of Code Platoon, but Code Platoon's grown enough where he's been able to kind of step aside from some of the operations stuff. So I want to say, like, they have a business development officer now that helps wrangle all of the internships. But one way or the other, I can find a name for you and an email address that, like, you could pass along to whoever you want to. Because I know Code Platoon is always actively looking for companies nationally that are willing to sponsor students, right? So, like, the money they pay, because it does typically cost money. Like, if you are a company and you want access to the internship program, there is a fee to join that. And basically you're paying that fee with the understanding that you will have access to a qualified graduate from Code Platoon. And so with that, again, it kind of goes back to the FizzBuzz example, where they say this is the coding challenge that gets rid of 99% of all people that apply for a coding job. It's because in this day and age of LinkedIn and Indeed and just like mass spamming of resumes, I mean, again, software development usually is in a fairly attractive salary range for most people. And so people just apply for it, right? And so for HR people, they're constantly digging through lots of resumes of people who can't actually write code. So again, if you've got veterans resources within your organization, you have the ability to meet your goal of basically hiring veterans, and then also someone that you, like, typically if you're going to be willing to buy into Code Platoon, you are comfortable with the curriculum and the product that they turn out. I mean, the corporate sponsors always change, but again, like my company, Eighth Boeing is a big corporate sponsor. JP Morgan takes a lot of Code Platoon grads. DRW, which is a big trading firm here in Chicago, Don Wilson, billionaire hedge fund trader, Chicago Trading Company. Like, there's a lot of Coyote Logistics. I mean, Innova, which is a fintech firm. Like, there's a lot of different firms that are looking for junior developers, and then like what the product that Code Platoon puts out. Like, and again, like the company I work for, Eighth Light, when I got hired at Eighth Light and when I graduated in April of 2019, there was basically two Code Platoon people that worked at Eighth Light. One person that was a Marine, and she was worked at Eighth Light, and she was a developer before Code Platoon ever came into existence. And then there was another Code Platoon graduate that basically applied to Eighth Light on their own and got hired into the apprenticeship without Code Platoon's help. And as of today, I think there's 9 people, one person that's involved with Code Platoon, and then 8 people that have graduated from Code Platoon that work at a company of like 140 developers. So like, my company really likes the product that they get from Code Platoon. And hiring a junior developer, just like hiring someone that doesn't have a lot of experience in any career field, can be a risk, right? And so this is a way for companies to mitigate risk a little bit if they believe in the product that Code Platoon is producing.
Yeah, if you get me that name, I'll definitely reach out to the proper people. And what happens from there, I don't know, but I'll
Yeah,
definitely
sure.
make the connection between the two.
Cool.
Hey, Charles,
Yes, sir.
the company that hired you, Eighth Light, did they took you right out of Code Platoon?
Yep.
Okay, and you're still with them, so obviously, you enjoy it, or at least enjoy it enough, right?
Yeah.
So do you now work in any other languages than what you learned? And if so, did Eighth Light like kind of invest in you and kick you loose to learn those languages, or put you in, additional training for that stuff?
Yes, absolutely. So, and that's a great question. And that is, so as junior developers, right? Like we're all hungry for our first job. But there are definitely red flags out there as well for companies, like as you're applying for companies. And one of the biggest things that I'll throw out to everyone is, one, the best job is your first job, right? Like if you can get it, it's not super easy to get like a development job straight out of boot camp. That's why, one, like the internship is a huge leg up. And also I strongly feel that Code Platoon puts out really good graduates. Like, I mean, there are attendance requirements, like there are assessment requirements that you have to meet to actually have officially graduated from Code Platoon and get your certificate. It got brought up in one of the earlier classes. There are coding boot camps out there that don't put out a stellar product. Like some of the white label ones that work with universities, like we talked about that one specifically. And you'll get, if you type in coding camp scams, right, like you'll get no shortage of different quote unquote coding boot camps that are not do not produce a high level of product. Again, I work for Code Platoon. I'm doing this for Code Platoon. I advocate for Code Platoon. But I'm not going to put anyone in a headlock and say you've got to go to Code Platoon. There are other high quality boot camps out there. One of the other ones that comes to mind immediately is Flatiron. Flatiron's got a really good curriculum as well. So if for whatever reason that one works out better for you, I mean, I hope all of you decide to continue with your careers doing this, because I think it is a great career choice. I said I'm 41 and I did finance. I ran a hedge fund. I was a options and derivatives salesperson. I was an institutional trader. And if I could do it all over again, like I would have said, I'm going to go get my bachelor's degree in computer science as soon as I got out of the Marine Corps when I was 24 years old, instead of like waiting until I was basically like 38 to change into tech. Like, I feel like I definitely I had fun for 14 years, but like I would be a lot further ahead in life if I would have picked this right from the beginning. But that's kind of an aside. So, but what you should be asking is what, like in interview questions, like, I mean, because they always give you a chance to ask questions back to them, typically during an interview. And a great question to ask them is like, I understand I'm a new developer. What do you do at your company to help me continue to develop? Like, what are you going to do to help me become a better developer? And what you want to hear is that, like, basically there's going to be pairing, right? You're going to be working side by side with another developer, even if it's remotely. Like, you're going to see a more senior developer lay down code, and like that they're going to be reviewing your code and giving you feedback on it. Because if no one ever tells you what you're doing wrong with your code, you're never going to get better at it, right? Like, it's not one of those things where we just intuitively figure it out and get better at it on our own. Like, you can to a certain amount, but to really get good, you have to be around other good developers. And I got recruited to go work for a company where they were going to, at the time, they were offering me more than what I was making at the time, but I would have been the most senior developer there, and I'm not that senior, right? Like, there are things that I watch some of the people that are more senior than me, and it still boggles my mind. Like, I have no idea what's going on. And I don't want to be the most senior person in an organization as a developer right now, because that means I don't have anyone else to learn from. And it also means that I would be limited in what I could teach other people. So I would also within that say that I would be wary of working for a company where there's only like, you would be the only developer or there'll only be one other developer. If there is only one other developer, if they're not the developer, like the person interviewing you, I would say like, if they offered you the job before you accepted it, ask if you could speak with the developer and just kind of get a feel for it. Because if you're only going to be working with one other person every day, like you want to know how they feel about it, right? Like, are they going to be like, I don't have time to deal with you, I need you to be productive, I'm not going to teach you anything? Like, that's not the type of position that you're going to be in. For someone like, hey, you know what, I've been doing this for whatever, 5 years, 10 years, 12 years, I'm super excited to show you how to do this. Like, I understand you're a junior developer, don't worry, we're going to get you up to speed. Like that I would feel better about, right? And both of those developers exist out there. But for me personally, A-Flight, their 6-month apprenticeship is specifically the main outcome of that apprenticeship is to teach you how to ramp up on other languages quickly. So I only knew JavaScript and Python coming out of Code Platoon. I got to 8th Light and they're like, okay, you know JavaScript and Python. All right, you're going to work in Java. All right, now you're going to work in Clojure, which is a functional Java language, JVM, Java Virtual Machine. Okay, now you're going to learn Android Kotlin. Okay, now you're going to learn Ruby. And like, so I got 4 new languages in 6 months. And now the project that I've been working on for the last 2 years, basically, I predominantly work in JavaScript and Ruby, specifically the React framework and the Ruby on Rails framework for the backend server. But I'm also going to be doing some DevOps coming up here over the next couple of months. So I'm going to learn infrastructure languages such as Terraform, and I'm going to start working with AWS more. I just terrified they gave me AWS admin credentials for this project, so now I can start deleting and destroying things, and I don't want them, but I got them. So we'll see what we can do with it. But even if you go through Code Platoon, you learn JavaScript and Python, and your first job, you learn JavaScript and Python, that's great. Like, knowing 2 languages is enough. I mean, learning more languages is, I mean, it's great, like, especially if you like learning languages, but once you get comfortable in a language, and I've said this a couple of times now, it's more important to know when to use a loop than how to write the syntax of a loop in a specific language, right? Because at the end of the day, all of these problems can be solved pretty much in any language, and you're just going to be working in the language that happens to be dictated to you by your circumstances. But if you don't know when to write a loop, it doesn't matter if you know the language or not, right? Like, it's more important that you focus on learning when to use these building blocks, right? Like, when do I want to iterate? Oh, I heard the word iterate, so I need to use a loop, right? Or I'm going to use a built-in function and like map over it, or whatever the built-in function in that language is. Or when do I need conditional logic? When will I use a specific variable type? And those are like the important concepts. All right. Any other questions on this stuff? Okay, so this is all kind of the stuff that Greg covered. I'm not really qualified to answer any of these questions. I think I flashed this up when he gave his talk. But yeah, I mean, vet tech seems like they used to, when they first started it a couple of years ago, like they were only giving it a little bit of money and then it would immediately run dry and then it wouldn't be available. But from what I understand, like they've really ramped up how much they're dumping into that. So vet tech is a great option. I use the GI Bill. GI Bill was great for me. I was unemployed immediately before Code Platoon. So like the full-time in person for me was a no-brainer. and in getting BAH for Chicago as an E5 while I went through Code Platoon definitely helped pay the rent. And then if you don't have any other options available, Code Platoon does offer general scholarships. Any Code Platoon student may apply. So I believe that's regardless of if you're the veteran or if you're a spouse, I believe you can apply for the scholarships, and they will vary depending on how much money they have in the scholarship pool at any given time. And with any of this, any in-depth questions, Greg Drobny, so greg@codeplatoon.org is your man for that. So again, Skill Bridge, any questions about that, you can reach out to Alicia. Alicia's great. You can also reach out to Greg as well. You'll have a PDF copy of the slide, so you have access to this. You've got a copy of it. Let's see here. Okay, so full stack development. I've kind of thrown the term out a couple of times now, but there's a couple of different parts to what we would call a modern web application. So here we just basically have it divided into back end and front end, which is the back end is server side and the front end is client side. You also notice you've got PostgreSQL down here, and that is actually the database technology. So you will learn how to do basic SQL queries and use Postgres, set up a Postgres database, hook it up to your Django backend server, and then serve data from a database to your front end client so that it can be viewed in a web browser. So basically a backend developer specializes in the server side. So they typically will be writing code in Python or Ruby, working with the Django framework, working with the Ruby on Rails framework, working inside the database, using, like in this instance, Django to create new tables and create new fields to keep data organized. Also, within companies that have very large databases, there's a specialty position called the DBA, which is a database administrator. So if you like SQL, that is always an option out there as well. There have been people that have graduated from Code Platoon and moved on into database administration positions. They will typically get paid the same as a developer, if not more in certain instances. And just because it's like a specialty position. On the front end, we have basically the client side, which is it's HTML and CSS. So I already kind of described that. HTML are the bones or the skeleton, and CSS is all of the window dressing and the colors. React is the JavaScript framework that makes things interactive. HTML is typically not interactive. You can create forms and you can create a button that will submit information. And that's pretty much about it for HTML. You can use CSS to make things light up or change colors or change sizes when you hover over them or click on them. But what React allows you to do is actually build a web application that not only sends information, like submits information through a form, but it actually retrieves information from your backend server and then displays that information. So anytime you're logging in to a website, like if you log into your bank or whatever, and you see all of your account information, you're typically at that point on a web application. You're not on a static website. You are clicking the button to log in. The front end server of that application is sending a request to the back end asking for all of your banking information. The back end gets all of your information out of your database entry, sends it to the front end, and then the front end basically makes it look beautiful and makes it look basically visually readable as a human, and typically what we we strive for is that that information is presented in an appealing manner. It doesn't always work out that way, but I mean, I don't know if anyone's ever seen, so if we could just do JSON. Right, so basically this would be how information comes from the back end. So this is a JSON blob. And that was just like a very basic JavaScript fetch request that's asking for information from this database. But whenever you see something that is basically presented to you on a website, this is how the computer sees it. It gets this chunk of information and then basically uses these keys, and the keys are called at different places throughout the website, and then the values are displayed. And instead of it just being all the same size text, that's when we can apply our HTML and our CSS to make things look differently. So let's see, resources, is there a Git? Yeah, so Git post, right? So, and I've got a JSON formatter hooked up to my web browser. So if you guys probably don't have a JSON formatter hooked up to your web browser, so let me drop this in the chat. And when you click on it, for you, it'll be even uglier. Like it'll just, there won't be any of the colors or the formatting separated on commas. It'll just be basically a bunch of run-on white text that your browser displays for you.
Charles, is this the type of data that you work with in order to kind of integrate all the databases that you hit with the stuff that you're working on?
Well, so this is coming from a database. JSON is like a standard formatting protocol that it doesn't matter if you're writing your web application in Python and JavaScript or Ruby, or if you're doing an enterprise application in Java or C#. When you communicate to a database, you want to get JSON back, and you want all of it to come in the same format, because that way anyone can read it. Like it's basically giving people something that they expect, versus like making a query and getting the data back in a weird format. Then basically that would throw everyone for a loop, right? We'd have all sorts of issues. So JSON is just like HTTP. So the hypertext transfer protocol, it's just an agreed upon formatting. Like technically it doesn't have to look like this. You don't have to send it in JSON, but if you don't, no one's going to use your product. And but yes, so like when I make a request to my server that I work on, like I could go into a real environment if I pulled out my government computer, but like when I'm doing it locally, I use different tools to basically talk to the server and see what the data looks like when it comes back. And let's see, I don't know if, right, so I think if I inspect it, it won't look a ton different here, but we could probably look at a network request. Right, and so here's my post, right? So like I look at data like this all day long, right? And I can open this up and see what's going on in here. So even if this was being presented in a well formatted, like ready to consume format, you can open, you can in Chrome, you can inspect what you're looking at and go to the network and refresh the page. And it could be, in this instance, it's posts, and like I can see like the requests that I made in here to a REST API. So there's my request headers, right? That's where I sent it to. I'm doing a GET to this path, all these different things. And then I can like, and this is like the raw response right here. Like it all comes back just like this. When I use preview, it's just basically making it easier for me to look at. It's Chrome trying to help me out, right? But it sent me 100 different posts. And then something like this is set up because I'm sure I can probably hit this like 100 times a day or something like that before they shut me off. And this is just like a free development resource that I can practice with. Right. I mean, the posts, or if I just want to see a specific one, if I want to see comments on a post, so there's a handful of posts out there. Or so like for comment one, or post one, there's a bunch of comments that they've drawn up into it. But this is, this whole thing is an API, and these are API endpoints where I'm basically requesting different bits of information depending on what endpoint I send my request to. And this, you'll learn how to do this in Code Platoon. That will be when you're working with Django, you will learn how to set up REST API endpoints, where you will have a server running locally on your computer, and you will have all of the data on your computer, but you will then be able to go into your browser or a terminal and request the data from your own computer, but have it served that way. And then eventually you'll learn how to push that server up into the web. Typically they use Heroku, which is another thing you can kind of poke at. Heroku is great for new developers because there's so much documentation on it, but it basically allows you to push web applications and backend servers up onto the internet, and then you can actually hit them like they were a real server. And it's free. You can have like three things running at a time for free, and it's a little clunky, but I mean, if you do pay, like there are professional services that are actually hosted on Heroku as well. They're just like, excuse me, they're just like AWS or Azure from Microsoft or Firebase for Google. All right, so let's see here. Yeah, and yeah, so that's basically the stack. And then this is kind of a little how it all ties together. So on the front end, you have JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. That all ties into the React framework. Like when you're working in React, you will be writing JavaScript, you will be working with HTML, you will be working with CSS, and all of it gets tied into the same framework. You will typically do this in an object-oriented format. And on the back end, you will set up a PostgreSQL server that is connected to your Django ORM, which is Object Relational Management, which basically it takes all of the requests from the front end. So when you ask for information, right? So when I do this and I click on posts and I get those posts returned to me, these posts are stored in a database somewhere, but I'm not talking directly to the database. I'm talking to a Django server or a Rails server or some sort of backend or management platform. And so that all ties into the Django framework. You also learn how to request information from third-party APIs, right? So if I'm writing my own software, and let's say for whatever reason, I need to pull in data from Json placeholder.com, that's a third-party API, and I can manage my own data and also the ability to talk to other APIs at the same time. Like it all gets tied together. So from here, for you looking in the browser, you never know the difference between talking to the database and the third-party API unless you're the developer and you know specifically what would be providing that information. But most people, when they're using it, you don't know if you're talking to directly to your bank's database or if they have a third-party API plugged into like credit union or something like that. Like it all looks very seamless to you, but you're talking to different APIs. Also, very large companies will have multiple APIs. And then that basically all gets tied together into one full stack development. So this is back-end development. This is front-end development. You will be, when you complete Code Platoon, you will have basic competency in what is called full stack development. You may have a preference. again, I talked to every Code Platoon class in this last class. When you go through, you get a mentor assigned to you. Someone asked me specifically if they could have a back-end mentor. And on like the third day of Code Platoon, it's like, well, why do you want a back-end mentor? Well, I want to be a back-end developer. But how much back-end development have you done? Well, none. Okay, so you don't know if you want to be a back-end developer or not. You just heard that it's better to be a back-end developer. At my company, you get paid the same regardless if you're full stack, back-end, or front-end competent. And you haven't done anything yet, so you don't know if, like, I know devs that hate front-end development, and I know devs that hate back-end development. And those are great people to have on your team, especially if you've got one of each. So just keep an open mind. And I also think too is that people get front-end development conflated with design. And that's another thing is like graduating from Code Platoon, they will not, like, there is no time spent on aesthetics, right? Like the developer, like web developers, even front-end web developers typically aren't the individuals that are actually making the designs of the website. Most teams will have a designer, right? So you actually have someone that is more akin to a graphic artist, but is also responsible for interviewing people. So like the kind of like a design workflow is you go to the target user of your product, you interview them, you ask them what they currently use, things they like about what they currently use, things they don't like about what they currently use. And then they go through and they actually draw designs. And they will typically draw it in a program like Figma or other industry standard programs that then I, as a developer, can go into and say, okay, they want this form to have these fields located here, this far apart, here's the spacing, here's the color. Like, I don't get to make any of those decisions. Like, all of that is dictated to me by someone that is a specialist in that role. And this is not a design boot camp. For people that have a natural aptitude for design, in fact, like the person that I got hired with at 8th Light had a Bachelor of Fine Arts in graphic design. And she is a front end wizard because like she can look at what the designers have done and understand exactly what they are going for, and then be able to lay down the front code that supports it. But again, like typically on a project, unless there are no designers staffed on it, like we aren't making wholesale design decisions. Now, part of my job is to keep my designers true, because sometimes they hand me stuff where I look at it and say, well, I get what you were going for, but you've already drawn it this way 20 other times on the project, and we're creating a new page, and now you're drawing it differently on this one page. Is this what you meant to do? Or should we keep it the way it is everywhere else in the application to keep everything looking standard, right? And so just because I am not a designer and I don't get to make design decisions doesn't mean that I'm not responsible for basically reviewing what's handed to me and just like doing it blindly. All right, so that is it for the slides. Are there any questions that I can answer on this slide or this slide? Oh, you're really quiet. I don't know if that's just me though.
Yeah, I was on double mute. Turn Code Platoon, is the time spent 50-50 front end and back end, or is there emphasis on one over the other?
It is pretty well divided, but you will probably get more time specifically with Python because you already have you'll have a working knowledge of JavaScript going into it, but also the way that it works out is that like the first couple of weeks, you're just going to be doing algorithm challenges, right? Like they're going to start reinforcing more complex concepts with you. You'll do challenges that are harder than what were these workup challenges. And you'll do them in both JavaScript and in Python. Then you will move into SQL or SQL and learn how databases work. And then you will work in Django, the framework, and you will stand up a mono repo, which just means that it's basically a full stack Django application where both the front end client and the back end are all running on one Django server. And then you'll learn how to make a Django API, and then you'll learn how to make a React server, and then you're going to learn how to make the React server and the Django server talk to each other. And then you'll go into your final projects. And there's typically like an individual final project, and then the end of the class, like the last 2 weeks, is like a group final project. Any other questions in there? Okay, so without any other questions on this, we can go ahead and take a look at some challenges. I'll solve a challenge here, and this will take us to about 7:30, and then we'll take a little break, and then we will get to we'll wrap up class by we'll just keep going with challenges here. All right, 1 second. And Yazid, what was the one that you said tripped you up?
It was the number of characters.
Number of characters. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at this one. I don't know if I've ever solved this one before. All right, write a function that takes in a string of lowercase characters and returns an object containing the count of each letter in the string. All right, so let's see here. This is no test for this. So let's go ahead and fork the replit. All right, so this. All right. So basically, we have a function that will take a string, right? So we'll do the same thing here. So input is equal to a string. And looking at the instructions here, returns an object containing the count for each letter in the string. So our output is going to be equal to an object with a number of occurrences as the key, and how did I spell occurrences wrong? Probably occurrences, and the letter that was counted as the value. All right, so we know that right away I'm going to need an object. That's what I'm returning. So let's go ahead and do console.log count characters and Was it the quick fox? Quick red fox jumped over the lazy dog. All right. So first things first, let's go ahead and just make sure that we can see our string when I do this. So, and in Replit, we will just click the run button, but JavaScript is actually powered by Node. And so when I want to run something in a real IDE, I have to tell Node that I want it to execute something. So let's make sure this is saved. And so I'll tell it node number of characters.js, and there is my console. It returns that my string there. All right. So at the end of the day, I know I'm not going to be returning my string. I need to return a object. All right. So we'll just call it results equal an empty object. So if I turn this to results and run it, now down here, I'm returning an empty object. So if I want to look at every single letter one at a time in this string, what do you think I'm going to need in this function?
All right.
Not necessarily an array.
Oh, like a loop?
Yes. Yep. We're going to want to iterate. So we're going to need a loop. All right. So we'll say for let I equal 0, I less than string dot length, I plus plus, and let's go ahead and console.log string I. Right, so there's all of my letters here. So it doesn't specifically tell me this, but well, actually, I won't worry about it quite yet. We'll work on solving the main problem. Has anyone heard in software parlance before? Has anyone heard the term MVP? And it doesn't mean most valuable player. No. Okay.
Is it minimum viable product?
That is exactly it. So, and I think we have basically the minimum viable product is described to us here. Write a function that takes in a string of lowercase characters and returns an object containing the count for each letter in there. And so I think there are some things that we can do to make this better at the end of the day, but we'll focus on solving the first part of the problem first. All right, so I know that I'm now getting each letter in here. So now that I've separated, or that I'm basically able to examine each letter in my string, what do I want to do next?
You index them?
Uh,
Or I guess you can do that.
So what I want to do is I want to start to add them to my object, right? So I want to grab a letter, and so which I'm doing, right? So if I do string I or string 0, console.log string 0. Right, I'm getting T. So now I want to take this T and I want to add it to results, right? Does anyone remember how to add something to a object? So it's actually pretty easy. So like if we were doing an array, we'd use a dot push, but there is no dot push for an object. We're just going to basically take the object, give it a key, and then equal it to the value, right? So I can say string I. Let's get rid of this, and we're going to return results. And so this will still be pretty ugly, right? So, but we're getting, looks like we just got the last letter here, because I basically have one key and it's what's going in there. And I'm sorry, am I saying this backwards? I am. So I was saying add the number, but we'll have duplicates of the number. So the key should be the letter. So I apologize. So the people that watch this video in the future, I was screwing it up and you were probably yelling at me the whole time, but I have realized the errors of my way. And we will not be adding a number as the key. We will be adding string I as the key. And then we will be adding a number to it. Right. And so this should now give me a list, but what the issue here is this is just giving me every single letter and it's assigning it the number 1. And it looks here to me as well that we're also doing the empty space as well. So it doesn't really call for it, but these are some things that I'm thinking about for the future, right? So future improvements. One, let's get rid of white spaces. 2, let's get rid of capitalization. Yeah, so I think that's good for now. All right. So basically what we need to do, because we're basically just running through this entire thing and we're just cramming the letter in there as a key value pair with the number 1. There's 2 things that we need to address here. One is that if I have the same letter a second time, I don't want to, and basically we're getting rid of any duplicates because you can only have one key, but we still just have the letter 1, right? Or sorry, the number 1. And what we need to do is start looking at how to increment this. So what can we use to make a decision inside of our loop, right? We need to take one of 2 actions. So what basic building block can we use to solve that?
Is that wild?
No, an if-else statement. Michelle got it. So we are going to use conditional logic, right? And so what we're going to say is if we'll do results string I, or I'm sorry, if results dot has own property, right? And so see here, does it tell me what that does? So determines whether an object has a property with the specified name, right? So we're deciding if that key is already in there or not, right? And so we can say has own property and then the current letter that we're checking. So we'll say that will be result, or it'll just be string I. And so this, because we're just going to put this in the if statement, we don't need to compare it. This has own property is going to return true or false. If the letter exists in there, it's going to return true. If the letter doesn't exist in there, it's going to return false. All right. And so for our true, what we want to do is say results stri plus equals 1. I think that will help, that will increment for us. Else results string I equals 1. So the first time through, the first time we run into a letter, the results object will not include that letter. This will return false we'll come down here to the else case, the false case, and we'll say, create this key of the letter and assign it a value 1. Every time we run into the letter after that, we'll basically, it'll be true. We'll come into the true case, and we're just going to take the value of this key, so whatever the letter is, and we'll increment the value by 1. All right, so let's see what happens when we run this. Okay. So this looks better, right? So there's one capital T, there's 2 H's in there, right? So there's one quick red fox jumped over the lazy dog, right? So there's 2. So to what they asked for in this, if I come back here and I grab this string, so let's just do this. Right, 1, 2, 3, 1, BDAC. 1, 2, 3, 1, BDAC. All right, so that is the MVP. That is the basic solution that we're looking for. All right.
Hey,
So
Charles,
now- yes, sir.
if we wanted to throw an else if space equals like eliminate it or get rid of it, how would you throw that in there, right? So like we had discussed previously with challenges, like making sure like kind of analyze the text entirely. It's specific to letters. So let's just say we wanted to, like the one where it has 8 spaces, right? Let's say we wanted to eliminate that. That would like results string I equals space. Like how would we eliminate that one aspect of what we're returning?
So you could technically add in an extra like if else case to this, but then every time you iterate through, you're making an extra calculation, right? Like your computer is checking to see if it makes that case or not. So honestly, because they haven't put the constraint on me, and I want to get rid of white spaces, but I also want to get rid of capitalization. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to declare a new variable. So I'm going to say let formatted string equal str dot replace, right? We looked at this yesterday, and say we're going to replace spaces with basically just an empty string, right? Now, if I run this again, I still get my 8 spaces because I'm still running it against string.length, and I'm doing string over here. So what I would do, and again, this is, you can do this in Replit, but this is a really nice thing that's different than most like word processing you're used to, is you can do multi-select. So probably Control D on a PC, but for me it's Command D on a Mac. So I highlight what I want to replace, and I can hit Command D and highlight multiples at the same time. And what I'm going to do is change this to formatted string. And also notice how, as I started typing, right, like it's telling me like these are my options. So there's formatted string. I do that, I replace it. Now I'm running it off this. Nope. And do, so I've got, that only took care of 1, which I don't like, but let's see here. Let me pull up the challenge from yesterday. So I believe it was in reverse word we had solved for this, and maybe I have to do it. So I remember there was something with it was, oh sorry, it's not reverse word, it was palindrome. So palindrome, And that's how we solve for evil olive, right? So we did word equals word dot replace. And so we did that and that. And that took care of it. That got rid of all of them. Well, actually, you know what? That's a good point. We didn't really check. Dot replace. If it only does it for the first one or if it does it for all of them. Right, so when we look at this code, and I'll just grab this here real quick. Bring this over here. And let's take a look at this. So this is going to replace dog with monkey when we console.log it, right? So we get the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy monkey. And so what happened, and notice how if the dog reacted, it was really lazy. So it only replaced the first instance that it came across, right? And so if we go back here and we take a look at replace, if pattern is a string, only the first occurrence will be replaced. The original string is left unchanged. The pattern can be a string or a regular expression, and the replacement can be a string or function called for each match. So this is a regular expression, or what we call regex, and this is a slightly more advanced concept. We don't really talk about it in the coding prep, and the reason being is there is actually a programming humor joke that basically says if you ever have a problem that requires regex, you have two problems. You will learn regex in Code Platoon. Regex, again, there are some like sick, twisted individuals out there that enjoy regex, but it is the bane of many developers' existence. For this specific instance, though, our regex can be fairly simple. So let's go ahead and take a look at that, right? So in our example down here, instead of dog or monkey, let's say let regex equal slash, I don't need that, right? And notice how it gave me a completely different color. It notices that with these two forward slashes, anything in here is going to be a regex. Right, and then notice same thing, like if I just put an I in after here, it'll give me an error, but it's light. And then here, when I do it, it gives it to me, it's dark blue, and it realizes that something's going on. And then over here, I'm going to say regex, so I'm calling it on my variable. And let's do this again, right? And looks like I still get this. So let's take a look at what the next step is going to be. So replace regular expression, literal that matches the substring the value. Let's see here. Description, specify a string as a parameter. Right, and like, so this is a more complex regex right here. Or I'm sorry, this is right here. So and there, it's basically, there's all sorts of symbols in it. But what we would look at is there are like regex helper, right? So EXR, regex 101. Right, and this, oh, actually, I would not use this one. Sorry, let's take a look at here. Right, and so this allows you to add in regex examples and it will show you in test text what is actually being identified by that regex. And as we change things, right, we will we'll change exactly what we're highlighting, right? And so basically I'm looking at capital letters. Now I'm looking at all the lowercase letters. So notice I'm doing that. There's special characters in there. And basically regex is used, it's kind of a standardization to be able to access specific patterns in strings. Where regex gets used a lot is like, especially for form input. So like there is a telephone regex, right? So regular expression to match a standard 10-digit phone number with all of the special characters in there. And so like that is the regex, right? So like you can see they can get really complicated when you're looking for complicated data, because they're specifying that they want 3 digits, 3 digits, 4 digits, and they want the dashes in between them, right? And so this will, and so this can be used for form validation, so you can help prevent scripting attacks or SQL injection, because if someone tries to put some weird characters in here, you can reject them with, like, if it doesn't, if you're basically intentionally excluding them through your regex. That was telephone. There's going to be like an email regex. So here, so like, and we would think like email could be super simple, but like here's an email regex. And what it's doing is it's capturing all of the special use cases, right? Like if you can't start an email with a number, you can't start an email with a special character, but you need at least so many characters prior to an @ symbol. And then after the @ symbol, you're only allowed to have certain characters. And you can see like they put this diagram in here, but that is like, if you were at work and someone said, okay, we need to implement regex on this email form, I'm not going to try and write one myself. I'm going to come out here and I'm going to find one, right? And like, I'm going to find one from a trusted source, like a score of 3,000 on Stack Overflow is pretty good. Fully RFC 822 compliant regex is inefficient and obscure because of its length. Fortunately, RFC 822 was superseded twice in the current specification for email addresses. RFC 5322 leads to a regex that can be understood if studied for a few minutes, just a few hundreds of minutes, and is efficient enough for actual use, right? And so a lot of like web application, especially like on the back end, like may already have this built in as a package where you can access it, and it's going to be maintained by someone. So if this ever gets updated, they update it and you don't have to worry about coming back and updating it. Yeah, the not so humble brag for sure. And but like you can see, you can do some, the sky's the limit on how complex you want to make your regex. But for us, I just want our regex. Yes, go ahead.
Could the typical developer create something like that within a reasonable amount of time? I don't know what a reasonable amount of time would be, but say if you needed to make that, could you make that if it wasn't already out there? I mean, to me, it just looks like a bunch of garbage, but yeah, like,
yes,
I'm sure it means something to you when you look at it.
No, it doesn't. And because basically, like what we're doing is like, this is whatever RFC 530 5322 compliant. Like this is the international standard for email formats, right? And someone is literally solving for every single edge case. Now, and if you can assemble complex IKEA furniture, then you can assemble a regex. It's the same thing, right? Like you're going to look for issue A, and then address issue A, and then issue B, and then address issue B. But unless you, again, like somebody was trying to torture you, nobody, like, and again, like your email regex, like there is a whole website dedicated to this, and this guy has saved thousands of lives, right? And like they've done it in all these different languages for you already, right? And so I would not, and of course, then there's Ruby, which is super simple, right? Perl, Perl, Ruby, so like old Perl. PHP looks like a nightmare, but you can see like how different languages address it differently. Right, so if you were building it directly into your SQL server, MySQL, Oracle are different flavors. Using grep, so if you're using Unix tools in your command line, right? So like Ruby simple version, I would probably just grab this, right? But I would not try and, especially this, like I would not try and solve this on my own. Like that's absolutely nuts. Yeah, general email regex stand RFC 5322 official standard. Like I would not try and do this on my own. And also your employer doesn't want to pay you to do that on your own. So let's see here, but I am still at an issue where I'm still only grabbing the first one, right? So let's take a look here. We're back on MDM, switching words in a string, using an inline function that modifies the matched characters, replacing a Fahrenheit degree with a Celsius equivalent, specifications, browser complexity. So moving multiple spaces in a string JS. Let's see here. So it looks like this is occurring multiple times. I think if I switch that to a G, it takes me to global. There we go. So that will basically, I think I is like, I'm basically it's one time, G is global, and that replaces it globally. Right. So now what I could do is I could say let regex equal this G, and let's go ahead and replace regex with that. And let's go back to calling this, and we can comment this out. Cool. So now we've got no spaces, right? And again, I don't believe I've ever solved this one before. And also notice how, like, I don't know how to do everything off the top of my head. But what I am doing is I am iterating, right? What I'm trying to do is keep getting closer to my solution. And I look something up. If I try it and it gets me closer to my solution, great. That means I'm on the right path. I keep it. I then go look for something else and then keep moving forward, kind of keep going. But like, it's not like I'm just ripping this code out of thin air and I have it memorized. Like I'm just iteratively trying to improve this and get better and better at it. So the next thing would also be, let's move everything to lowercase. So same thing, I could do string dot to lowercase and do that. And now, right now I don't have that capital T in there anymore. Right. And so now I'm just keeping track of the actual true occurrences of that letter. Right. And I could also take my regex and make it more complicated and rip out punctuation marks rip out like any numbers that are in there, anything like that. But this, I think, is again a little bit better than what they were asking for. The only other thing I would maybe take a shot at here is, let's see if sorting all of the letters in a string. Right, so how do we change this into this? This is in Java. How about JavaScript? Let's see here. Don't necessarily think I would put that much into it. Sorting all of the letters in a string JS. All right, so sort string. So it looks like we're splitting it into an array. Oh, this is using some older code. All right, so you on Thursday last week, Guillermo taught you about higher order functions. You guys remember that? All right, so all a higher order function is a function that calls or returns another function, right? And basically, it makes use of another function. So I can either, if we're happy with this, I can move on to the next challenge. If someone's got another challenge that they want me to look at, or if you want me to solve for sorting these, I can show you how I would basically tackle that. Any preferences one way or the other? Okay. If there's no preference, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, if we're gonna do another problem, the hot potato problem, I guess I looked over your solution that you sent to me, and I was wondering why that would be the proper solution. It was just a more I realize it's less code, but it's a more complicated solution.
Yeah, sorry. Solve another one or solve this one?
This one's still moving. You got to finish it.
Okay. All right. So I'll do that, and then probably I'll look at hot potato on Thursday, because that's another, like, that's one where the solving it isn't like a great feat of coding. It's more just a like knowing how math works. But yeah, I'll definitely go over that one on Thursday. So, or if I have time, I'll shoot for it today. But honestly, like, being able to solve it in code and then also explain it in plain English, I don't know that I would give the best explanation of it either. All right, so let's go ahead then. And basically what I would look at doing is doing something very similar like this. So this is comparing the ASCII or the ASCII code by using array.sort method. So it looks like there is something that is built in for it. So sort string, right? So let me go ahead and just grab this real quick. We'll take this. I'm going to drop this in right here. All right. And so I'll go ahead and comment that out for right now. And let's go ahead and let's change. How did I do this? Okay, I did this. So let's go. I don't know why they did this like that. This should be a const. This is also unnecessary. All right, and so if I grab this right here and I say console.log sort string and drop my string in here, let's go ahead and run this. All right, so there is all of my letters sorted, of course, with my all my spaces in there as well. So how I would solve this as a higher order function is I would then, because this is held out here at the global scope, what I could do is formatted string, and I could take all of this and wrap this in sort string. All right, and then I will comment this back out, and I'll do this. All right, and see what I did? Now, instead of putting letters in there by first occurrence, which I'm still doing, I'm actually going to store these in alphabetical order, right? Which is a nicer way of doing it. And this is I did this as a higher order function, right? Where I'm actually calling another function inside my function, right? And I'm just taking my formatted, what was my formatted string, right? So I'm lowercasing and removing all capitalization. Then I'm replacing all of my spaces with nothing. So I'm effectively deleting them. And then I'm feeding that in as string in here. It's coming in and I'm splitting it into an array. And then I'm sorting it. And then I'm joining it and returning that join. Right. And if I wanted to, I could probably string all of that together in here, but it wouldn't be as readable, right? So I could do, let's see how I do this. We'll see if this works. I don't know if this will work or not. So I can do string dot split on every character. Actually, I would want to do all of these first, then dot split on every character, dot sort, and then dot join. All right, and now I'm not using this anymore. I'm not calling it. Right, and I still get everything in alphabetical order. And what I would probably do here is something like this. It wants to shove it back there on me, that's fine. All right, so yeah, oh, my auto formatter keeps shoving it back, but basically I wouldn't just like cram it all on one line. So I would do something like this to make it organized. It still reads it like one right after the other. All right, so that would be the solution on that one, if we don't want to use it as a higher order function. But to me, this one, I like, it starts to get a little bit of crazy because we're doing a lot of things, but we're also doing it in order, right? Like we're stripping out capitalization, we're stripping out empty spaces, we're splitting it into an array on every single character, we're then sorting them, and then we're joining it all back together into a string. And then we're going to iterate through that formatted string and check each letter and push it into the results as a key value pair. If it has seen it before, we're going to increment the existing one. If it's never seen it before, we're going to add it as a new key value pair. And so that would be with that one. So we've done the, got rid of white spaces, we got rid of capitalization, return the letters in alphabetical. All right, so there's our improvements. All right, any questions on what I did here? Okay, so again, inside the IDE, things that we don't get in Replit, right? So we get the color formatting is a little bit more verbose, more options. And then also you can notice that basically the colors change as they match in sets, right? So I can tell this blue parenthesis belongs to this one over here. As well as you notice, like when I click next to that one, see how it highlights it in a white box that highlights the corresponding one in a white box. These are just little incremental improvements that make life easier as you're looking at code. Right? When I first started this up, I had like a helper function that we use at work, and you can start to see kind of like how dense the code gets, right? So if I go back here, oops. All right, so in like this particular file in here is 102 lines long, and is this whole thing only does one specific action when you click on a button. This thing does one other separate thing when you click on it, and this is Ruby, which will be very similar to Python when you look at it. But when we take a look at this, this like each folder is completing a different action for me, right? And these are typically kind of where you want files, and somewhere in like the as short as possible, but typically not much more over 100. Some of the files that we deal with are like 500 or 600 lines long, and they just have to be because of what they're working with. And sometimes splitting them up into separate files is actually making it harder to read. But you can see again, like the density of the color changes, and each one of those color changes is representing something different, and it helps you keep all of this sorted. And when things aren't the right color, right? Like if I change that to raised instead of raised, and now it's a light blue instead of a dark blue, it's helped drawing your eye to where the issue might be. And again, like this is one of the default like dark themes. For whatever reason, there are people out there that like a theme called Neon Vomit, and to me, it's like blinding. Like all of these colors like turn neon, and I don't know how people look at that all day long. But yeah, like you have like once you start to modify your IDE for your own specific settings, you start to have control over all of these different things. So, and also, once you're in an IDE and you start getting familiar with using your terminal, you're seeing me type in these commands like CR, which is actually like code refresh. And I use things like aliases so that like commands that I use every day throughout the day, instead of having to type in like code /refresh, right? Like I can just type in CR and that command does the exact same thing, because I'm telling it that that's what those initials stand for in my terminal profile. Okay, so you sent me back to here. I don't want to be there. It'll be over here. All right. So let's see here. So that was the number of characters. Izzy, did that answer all the questions that you have about that one?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it.
No problem. Let's see here. So we could look at, let's see here. We've not done prime numbers, correct?
Correct, we have not.
Okay, so this one is a prime number is a positive integer with no divisors besides itself and one. It cannot be divided without a remainder by any number inside itself and one. Write a function to check whether a given positive integer greater than one is prime or not. Right, so 3 would be true, 5 would be true, 10 would be false because it's evenly divisible by 2 or 5. So it's 7:53. Let's go ahead and take a break until 8:05 so I can drink some water and get a little bit of my voice back. And we'll come back and we'll take a look at this one because this will also be a good one where I believe there's like a brute force solution to this. And then there's a more elegant math trick so that we could solve it. And me being myself, I'm probably going to brute force it the first time and then we'll look up how to do it more elegantly because I don't remember the math trick off the top of my head. But I believe there's an algorithm we can use to generate or check for prime numbers, like using a square root or something along those lines, I think. But I did not pay attention to math class in high school, so we'll relearn it again tonight. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording. And I will see everyone at 8:05 Central Time, about 11 minutes.
Yeah.
All right, excellent. Welcome back from the break. Yazid had a question about the prime number, or sorry, the number of characters challenge. So he had asked, let's see here. So I'm just going to copy over what you had put in there so I can take a look at this and answer this. Okay, so let me just comment this out for a second. Okay, so Charles, in the number of character challenge, can you explain why in the above code the object doesn't contain each character of the argument being passed? So with this one, let's see here, we've got resulting object, so resulting object, console.log resulting object. So let me, got everything we needed to that. So let's see what happens when we run this. Oops. Okay, so this code does give you basically each of the characters is showing up, but you're only getting the number 1 because you're just going through and assigning it the value 1.
No, the question was we have the argument being passed is B, D, A, C, D, A, A, right? So I was expecting in the object to have each single character one by one.
Okay, so remember, keys inside an object are unique. And so what's happening when you come into this, and so let's just change this to BB for right now. Right, and if I run this, We just get B1. And what is happening is you are getting the string BB, and you're coming in here, and string 0 is basically going to be B. You are pushing up the key B with the value of 1, right? And then you come back in here, and the second letter is B, and you are basically adding the key of B with the value of 1, and you are just overwriting over the top of it. A object can only ever keys have to be unique. Right, so even if I go like this, I'm only going to have the 1B. Right, and so where we got into it was basically if resulting object that has own property, right, of string I. So if we're saying that that is already in there, what we were doing was resulting object string I, and then we increment by 1, and then else we create it, right? And so when we do that, now we see that there's 11 B's in there, because you cannot create the same, you can create the same keys over and over again. Like I can do this, right? Like I'll hard code it to screw it up and say resulting object with the key of B is equal to Charles, right? And so we've come through here, we've iterated through it, and then I've basically reassigned it to Charles down here, because I cannot create the key more than once. I can just reassign it a value. So what you're doing is, without adding in this, you're basically just reassigning the variable to 1 over and over again. I've got an extra curly brace hanging out here somewhere.
Is it correct to say this works because you only have a key once, each key is unique? That's what essentially lets this solution work?
Yes, and the fact that, so again, like when I do it this way, right, and let me get rid of this. Right, and I get 1. So let's take this over to Python tutor here real quick. Right, so there's 40 steps in here, which seems excessive, but right, so we call it, so there's our string, right? So now we're in our loop, and there's our resulting object, and we're at B1, right? And now we're iterating through, and we come in here and see how we're counting through the blocks. So we're counting through the index of our string, but we're only ever ending up with B1, right? We're not creating multiple B1s. We're just assigning the value of 1 over and over again to B. Right, until we're done, and then we return that. And again, same thing, if we edit the code and we turn it back to looking something like this, All right, so now we're coming in, we're creating our object, which is empty. We're hitting our for loop. We're coming in here and basically we're checking to see if string I, which is B, already exists. It doesn't, so we come down here and then we're going to run this. So we're going to get B1, right? Now we loop through to the next B, right? We hit that if statement and now this is true. So we're going to come in here, right? So now we're going to execute this line of code and now we've got B2, right? And we're just going to keep iterating through the rest of these Bs, right? And we're just going to keep incrementing it up by one at a time until we hit 11 and we're going to punch out of our loop. And that is, that's it, basically. Like we return that object. And that's how we want it to work. But you cannot have, in fact, like even if I try and force it, so let's do this. Like if I say, let example object equal first name Charles, first name Todd, all right? And I say console.log example object, right? All I get is Todd, right? Even though I see two of them in the code, when the computer runs it, it only is going to allow one of them to exist, and it's typically going to give it the value that it sees last. All right, so if I, like, even if I do this and say like last name Kubiak, right, like it still doesn't matter. Like it's still just seeing first name, last name. All right, and if I take this, all right, and put that last. All right, so now it's giving me Charles instead of Todd. All right, and you also see that the order changed because the first time around, it's seeing first name first, and then it's basically seeing that value last, and now it's seeing this value first, and then this value last. So that's why you see them flip around like that. Like if I switch Todd up to here, all right, now the first name comes in first. But like you shouldn't get wrapped around the axle of orders of objects because there is no quote unquote guaranteed order. There's no index position in an object. They're just keys, and the keys can technically be in any order because you're not accessing an object by a numerical index position. You're accessing it directly with the name of the key to get to the value assigned to that key. Okay, and so Yuzi, does that help clear things up a little bit for you?
Yes, a lot. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. All right, so on to prime numbers. Okay, so a prime number is a positive integer with no divisors besides itself and one. It cannot be divided without a remainder by any number besides itself and one. Write a function to check whether a given positive integer greater than one is prime or not, right? So we know that one is not considered a prime number. So let's go ahead and grab this. Let's open up a new file, code number.js. Okay, and then over here. All these tests aren't very pretty. Test cases. All right, so prime number is positive integer and number size itself, and check whether, so it's basically, if I look at this, I'm going to have, let's go and do this. Going to have one input, which is a number. And we're going to have one output, which is a Boolean value, informing us if the number divided as the input is a prime number. All right. So a couple of things here. A prime number, I understand from this. Is 2 a prime number? Anyone want to take a stab at that off the top of their heads? Okay, I'm seeing Steve nod his head yes. So 2 is a prime number. I definitely had to look that up in the list of prime numbers. So 2, 3, 5, 7 through 97, like these are all of the prime numbers from 1 to 100. All right, so notice there, one thing that we know about prime numbers is that they're typically, or they're always going to be odd. An even number cannot be a prime number. So we're going to solve for this, and then we're going to figure out ways to make it better, just like we did with the last one. All right, so this says test. These aren't really tests.
Real quick, because I don't want you to base your logic off it. 2 is an even number.
2 is an even number. You are correct, but it is also a prime number. So, and I apologize because you have to be specific. Anything over 2 that is an even number. So, and because 2 divided by 2 is what?
1.
Right, and that's the only thing that it will return an odd number by dividing itself by. So every even number can basically be eventually reduced down to 2, and 2 cannot. And so that is specifically why 2 is a prime number. So yes, thank you for that. And so it looks like they're trying to make it tricky for us by throwing some strings in there, which I don't necessarily get why that has to do with the challenge. So we're going to take that out. So that should be false. That should be true. That should be true. That should be true. This should be false, right? Okay. So when we're looking here, basically, and so if anyone is familiar with the term brute force as it comes to computing, that's basically where you just use your computing horsepower to check every possible possibility, right? Like, so the brute force of trying to solve for this that I would start with is basically to take that number and start dividing it by every number less than it. And if, as long as it does not divide evenly into any number less than it, then it is a prime number. And so if any number, if it does divide evenly into any number, it is not a prime number, right? So like what we're looking for is that, and the way we could do that is by using the modulus operator, right? Because that gives us a remainder when we divide. So let's go ahead and start thinking about how we would work through the brute force version of this. So first off, I know that I'm going to need to iterate, and I'm basically just going to start by checking it with each number underneath it. So this is going to be one of those loops where I'll go ahead and I'm going to iterate down. And so, and again, this probably won't be the perfect solution the first time around, but we'll see what we can do to get close, and then we'll go from there. All right, so we can say while num is greater than 0, right? We can, so we'll go ahead and console.log, sorry, console.log num, and then we're going to do num minus equals 1. Oops. Number is prime, number, I didn't see it, go. So what am I doing wrong here? Is prime. Do while num, let's see here, console log num. Well, that's weird. So why are we just giving me empty spaces here? That's what I'm doing. Sorry about that. So I am typing in code instead of node, and that is just opening the file over and over again, which is why it wasn't good. That looks a lot better. All right, so there we go. So if we do this, we'll start this as 10. All right, so there we go. We're not returning anything, so the function itself is undefined. Okay, so let's see here. If we are going to basically check against this, right? So we could do, let's see here. Sorry, I'm just trying to think this through here for a second. Okay, you know what? I don't think I want to use a while loop. I think I want to use a for loop. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's do for let I equal 0, I less than num, I plus probably. Okay, so now we don't have to decrement there. We're counting up to the number. And so what we could do is we basically need to find out if a number is evenly divisible by another number. All right, so what we could do is if we say console.log num modulus I, right, this is going to, with 10, what we're going to do is it's going to basically spit out the remainders, right? So in here, let me do this. Let's say, let's do num modulus, oops. As a remainder, that. So this should now give us some verbose information, right? So 10 modulus 0 has a remainder of not a number. 10 modulus 1 has a remainder of 0. 10 modulus 2 has a remainder of 0. 10 modulus 3 has a remainder of 1. 10 modulus 5 has a remainder of 0. Now, we already know we shouldn't be dividing by 0 or 1, right? So we can start here, right? So we can start dividing by 2. So there's our first improvement, right? And so that because we know it's divisible by 2, it's an evenly divisible number, right? So we can, we know there, and we also know here that it's evenly divisible. So, and I mean, this works for 10. This works for whatever we could say 57, I believe, is a prime number. Right. So here, like we're brute forcing our way through it, right? So actually, so 57 is evenly divisible by 3. So let me guess, is that 19, I think? Yeah. So I don't know my prime numbers, but so we see this here and we see it here at 19, right? And so we don't care about all of the times that it's not evenly divisible by 0. We only care about if it is evenly divisible by 0, right? So what is something that we could do to keep track of basically if it's ever divided, like if we ever get something that's evenly divisible?
Can you do like an else or if?
Yep. So we could definitely, we're going to need an if else statement to trigger something, right? So like, and really we don't need an else statement. We only need an if statement. So it basically, if something is even like comes out with a remainder of 0, we want to take action, right? And so with this, a prime number is a positive 1 output, which is a Boolean value. So it doesn't really tell us if it's prime or not. So let's go ahead and start solving the this way. So what we can do is we can make this as short as possible, right? If we're just going to return a Boolean value. So we can say if num modulo I triple equals 0, right? We can return false, right? And so the first time it hits that number where it's evenly divisible by 0, we will return false. And then if nothing else happens, we can return true, right? So if it never hits that case, oh, sorry, I don't want that in mind. I want to loop through all my possibilities, and if we never hit that return statement, we'll exit the loop and then we'll return true, right? So if I do this now, and console.log is prime 57, we get false, right? And let's go ahead, take a look here. So 59 is a prime number. And so we've got 59, right? So that is true, it is a prime number. So probably where we're lacking here still, right, is if we do 1, that's true, but 1 is not a prime number, correct? So what I would do at that point is probably say, if num is triple equal to 1, return false, right? Because this is a special case where 1 is kind of a number unto itself, and it is not a prime number. And we're not going to start counting till 2 down here. So the reason we never hit false in here is because we're already counting above 1 in our loop, right? So I can add this special case here. Now I'm getting false when I return a 1. All right, so next special case that we probably are going to need to address is if we do 2, let's see what happens here if we correctly get this or not. Right, so we do get 2 as true as a prime number, so we don't need to do anything there. So my next step here would be to improve this, right? So this is just telling me true or false if it's prime or not. But what I don't know is what is it evenly divisible by, right? Like I picked 57 and said, hey, I think this is prime. It was not. It was evenly divisible by 3 and 19. So what we could take a look at doing is to make this a little bit more verbose is we could say, there's a couple of different things we could do. So we could take away just returning a Boolean value. So if all this was returning it for like another method to check or whatever, we could just leave it right here. But because we're returning this to the console and we want to pass through more information, let's take a look at how we could make this a little bit more verbose using a data structure. Right. So what I could do here is, first off, instead of just returning true or false, I could return a string here. So I could say the number one.
Can I ask a quick question before we move on from
Yep.
the initial solution? And I'm probably just thinking about this wrong. The loop I starts at 2. And I tried solving this on my own and I couldn't solve for 1 without putting it as an if statement. I thought if I set I to start at 2, num modulus I would be num modulus 2 and it wouldn't equal 0. So I guess I don't understand why that equals 0. And maybe I'm just way off base, but
So what is the calculation you're not sure of?
for let I equal 0 for the loop, I thought that meant the loop is going to start at 2.
It does.
And then the if statement, num modulus I, wouldn't that start I at 2?
Yes,
For the
it
if
does.
statement?
Yes, because we're starting at 2. So if I do console.log I here, right, and then I start at we'll say 10. Oh, back to code. How about node numbers? Sorry, I'm missing something here. I'm inside my for loop. I'm console.log I. Console.log prime is 10. Go from 2 to false. What is up with that? It's less than num. It's plus console.log I. So this should be the I++ should be iterating it up by 1 each time. There we go. So, but you can see we start counting at 2 and we stop counting at 9. And the reason it wasn't iterating through is because the very first time with 10 is evenly divisible by 2. So it's hitting this false and it was stopping the loop. Right. So, and you can start your I wherever you want to, right? So if I start I at 5, it doesn't start counting until 5. Right. And same thing, because we're not using a length, we're actually, because we're getting passed in a number, we're counting as long as this is less than 10.
Maybe it's just I'm thinking about modulus backwards, but I don't know why I thought 1 modulus 2 wouldn't equal 0. But I could be thinking about it backwards where I thought it should have been 2 modulus 1 equals 0, but 1 modulus 2 would not end up in a whole number.
So 1 modulus 2 is 1. I don't know the math behind that. And it's the same thing, like basically 2 modulus 2, right, is 0. But again, it's still a prime number. I don't know why that is, like what's happening in JavaScript. I mean, we definitely
Okay, fair enough.
do it. Let's see here. Why is 2 modulo 2 0 equal 0? These aren't really. So let's see if this sheds some light on that. Nullish coalescing operator, JavaScript. Oh boy. English fonts. Right, and I think so. The remainder operator, and it's not truly a modulus. It's in JavaScript. It's the remainder. Right. So note that while in most languages, % is a remainder operator. In some, Python, Perl, it is a modulo operator for the 2 values of the same sign. The 2 are equivalent, but when dividend and divisor are different signs, they give different results. To obtain a modulo in JavaScript in place of that, you basically have to do this. All right. And again, same thing. I'm not sure what the difference is in those 2 things. And I guess we shouldn't call it a modulo in JavaScript. It is a remainder symbol. And I think the reason that like 1 divided by 2 and the remainder is 1, right, is because 2 doesn't go into 1, right? So like it's just the 1 is left over. And again,
Okay.
I could be stepping out on a limb. So if I do like 3 and 4, I don't know if we'll see 3, right? We see 3. So because it doesn't go into it at all.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Cool. So yeah, I mean, and it's a tricky one, and I'll make a note to update that in the slide deck to call it a remainder operator, because we don't need to make it any more confusing than it already is. All right, so back to here, right? And so now what we're going to do is, if instead of just returning true or false, we'll make it a little bit more verbose. So we'll say is prime 1. The number 1 is not a prime number, right? And so we could then say, let's see here. Okay. Yeah, so, and then what we could take a look at doing here is, instead of just returning false, we could say, we could create a data structure here and say const, or we'll say let, we'll call it even results, right? And we'll make that an empty array. And we could say if num remainder I is triple equal to 0, we could then say even results dot push I. All right. And so then once we get out of our for loop, so now every time we have something that is an even remainder, we could then turn around and basically, we'll just do this for right now, even results. Right, we could say, we don't want to run it with 1. If we start with, we'll say 100, right? So now we see that 100 is evenly divisible by 2, 4, 5, 10, 20, 25, and 50. So what we could now say, instead of it just returning true or false, is we could say if even results dot length is triple equal to 0, we could return, oops, let's do this. Num is a else not a prime number. It is evenly divisible by right. And so now, right, so 100 is not a prime number. It is evenly divisible by 2, 4, 5, 10, 20, 25, and 50, right? Like it even pulls our array into a string. And if we were to put in something like, what was it again? I think it was 59 was a prime number. 59 is a prime number. So if we were to run this with 59, right, 59 is a prime number. And so this gives us a little bit more information, not just true or false. It's kind of telling us why. All right, so it is 8:47, 8:48. We've got roughly about 10 minutes left in class. Are there any questions as far as what I did with this one?
I have just one question, Charles.
Sure.
On the top, you wrote in if num strict equals 1, return that statement. Would you be able to say like if num, if you go down to your for loop and the if else statement in there, can you put what you have there and or num strict equals 1? Would that mess it up somehow?
So it wouldn't mess it up, but it
Would
would,
it clean it up or anything?
no, it would make it worse computationally.
Okay.
Because what this is doing is, remember, the return is the last thing ever, right? So if we get the number 1, like I never load this up, I never run through any steps of my loop, I just punch out immediately, right? So all of this gets disregarded, right? So I never have to run through these steps, right? If I don't do it here, then I go into my loop, I check this statement, and then I run into my if else statement saying, is it a 1? Right. And I would have to
Every time.
right. And I would have to put the if statement up here first, right? Because if not, it would run through this one first.
Okay.
Right. And I also, I don't even know if, so let's take a look here. If I do console.log, I'm in, oops, I'm in the loop, right? And if I get rid of this, because I mean, and the other issue is that then I would start counting by 1. And like, if I have to change this to 1, right? So if I change this to 1, I don't even think I get inside my loop. Maybe I do, right? See, notice how I never hit this console statement because I come here and I is equal to 2, and 2 is this is already false, right? 2 is not less than 1. So I never run through my loop one time. And to do that, I would have to start counting at 0. And what the problem is that then every number is evenly divisible by 1, right? So prime number is only evenly divisible by itself and the number 1. So every single number would be that 1 in there, right? And so I'm pretty sure that would follow it up there. And so was it 59, was it, right? Keep going back to that. Yeah, 59. So and if I ran this, right, so I hit the loop, 59 is not a prime number, it is evenly divisible by 1, right? And that should not disqualify it from being a prime number. And then basically what I have to do is then filter even results to see if it only contains the number 1, and then kick it out to get it back down to a length of 0, right? Or put in additional conditional handling if it's only the number 1 in there. So keeping it up here, and this is what's usually referred to as a guard clause. And basically I'm guarding the rest of the method from a specific case. And you don't want to use this for something that can have multiple things. But when there's instances where there's like one specific case, like the number 1 will follow this up, then we're okay basically just writing some if logic that saves us the trouble of having to deal with a bunch of extra work down here. All right, and then the next thing is, and I think what the trick is, I was looking it up, was that you don't have to count to the full number. At a certain point, it's a trick for finding prime numbers. So divisible by any prime number between 2 and the square root of the number. So we can basically, instead of saying just like go to num, we could go to square root of num. And I'm pretty sure in JavaScript that is math dot square root num. Right, and then see, notice how we looped less times. And same thing if we did 100 here. Right, so, and I guess what the other issue is though, and I'm not super worried about it because again, this would be saving computation, is when we do it from the math dot square root of num, we get basically the things that it's evenly divisible by on the bottom part. And then if we do it, if we count all the way up, right? So we get 2, 4, 5, 10, 20, 25, 50. So we get some larger numbers in there. So if we were only going to do it where we were only returning true or false, then doing it by the square root, and really where we're at, let's do this. Let's do console.log I, right? And so when we run this, we get all of those answers, but we have to iterate through basically 100 times or whatever, 98 times from 2 to 99. And if we do it from the square root, we're still learning that it's not a prime number, it's a prime number, right? But we only have to iterate through 8 times, right? To figure out that it's not a prime number. All right, so, and I mean, and even past that again, like if we were going to true and false, then we could just also punch out the first time. So like as soon as we hit 2, we could punch out, and that would just basically bring it down to 1 instance. Like if we only wanted to know the first time it was evenly divisible. Right? So different problem sets are just like different levels of efficiency. All right, so now we're basically at 8:55. Any other questions on anything else that we discussed tonight? I know talked a little bit more about kind of like the day in the life stuff and what you can expect out of Code Platoon. And I hope you find that helpful. And I'm always happy to answer questions along those lines, as well as like the technical questions that we deal with.
I do have a question, not necessarily on anything that we talked about today. And we're creeping up on the end of time, so I could potentially just post it in the Slack, but a lot of the challenges that I've been coming up on, and I'm sorry I don't have a good example, but it's basically like the tests that you're encountering. The entry would be like an empty array, and it wants you to return an empty array, and I feel like I'm getting hung up on that because it's just giving me like it's not passing those tests.
Oh, well, I mean, hopefully that, and again, without knowing specifics, is that typically like a very beginning test is like, if I give you no input, you give me the output of an empty array, right? Like that's just checking to make sure that you're actually returning an array. And then from there, I will give you more and more complex tests.
Okay, I guess that makes sense. But I feel like when it does give me that empty array, it runs into like undefined. I don't know. I would have to. I'm gonna have to find another one and attempt it again. And
well,
if I get problems, I'll.
And so remember, so like right here is an example. We've got even results, and if I do this, this is undefined. This will return an empty array, right? So if I just change this here for a second to do this, and I say return even results, when I do this, right, there is an empty array. Now, however, if I just say this and I return this, that is undefined because this instantiates a variable, this assigns the variable. It's two separate things, because what's really happening is it's this. Right? But JavaScript lets us condense that down. But if you have specific issues, and especially if it's something with Code Platoon, and feel free to Slack me if there's an issue. I can see what I can do to get it cleaned up.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, guys. Any other questions? All right, I'm going to stop recording here, and if anyone's got